Um, these are native bees, and I want to contrast those with the honeybee. There are alike honeybees in many ways. Um, Honeybees are not native to North America. They are from Northern Africa, Southern Europe. They've been domesticated for thousands of years uh, and used obviously for honey and as well as for pollination. Um, but in North America, again, they're not native. They were brought here probably around 1622 for honey, wax, and pollinators, and they've really become sort of a symbol of prosperity. We think about a prosperous culture, and we think of it as the land of milk and honey. Um, the honeybees that many beekeepers cultivate are Italian honeybees, but there are some from other places, and of course the uh, notorious Africanized bees that received such a bad rap back in the 80s or 90s as the so-called killer bees. But since the 1620s, these bees that were brought to North America have escaped and spread throughout North America. And in doing so, they have been great pollinators. Um, they have these little pollen baskets on their hind legs, and they gather the pollen up. And we envision these honeybees as very altruistically uh, transferring pollen from plant to plant for us. Actually, they're gathering the pollen for their use, but in the process, they move pollen from plant to plant for us, and take most of it back to feed to their young. But as we're aware, the numbers of bees out there has fallen. One reason is need. In the past 75 years, the number of bee colonies are a fraction of what they were 75 years ago. Um, some of the reasons are the things that are listed on our screen. Some of them, though, are more cultural and economic. If you think back to during and just after the Second World War, rationing and sugar was in short supply. Well, a way to get around that was have a beehive and collect honey, wild honey perhaps. And but now that sugar is not in short supply, numbers of beehives have fallen. But there's a number of things that there are mites out there. There's a disorder, colony collapse disorder, that is when a colony dies out without a known reason. Of course, the Africanized bees are hybridizing with honeybees, causing problems. We have predators out. We've always had predators, skunks and bears and things like that, and foul brood disease. Um, and the thing with honeybees, though, they live in colonies of tens of thousands of individuals. And when you have that many individuals in that close proximity, and one of them gets varroa mites or foul brood or something like that, as we learned in the past 5 years or so from COVID, when you have individuals in close proximity, diseases are going to spread. And that's a problem with honeybees, is that they do live in very close proximity, tens of thousands in these small boxes, white boxes typically, and spread diseases. So as numbers of honeybees are going down, we still need pollinators. While the numbers of kept hives have diminished, and wild bees, I'm certainly old enough to remember running into a lot of bee trees as a young man. I don't see as many now. The last bee tree I saw was on the college campus where I worked, and I was a little concerned that the bees might sting someone or have a problem. So I called Buildings and Grounds and asked them if they would call a beekeeper. And of course, they came and sprayed the bee tree and killed them all. Not what I had in mind, but the point is we just don't see many wild bee trees like we used to. But the number of crops that need pollination has not decreased. So we need to look at things that will do pollination, not to replace honeybees, but to supplement the pollination needs. So for that, I want us to take a look at the native North American bees. You may not know it, but there were something like 2,000 species of bees that were here in North America to greet Columbus when they landed. Uh, these are all pollinators. None of them, however, are honey producers. There are no honey producing bees that are native to North America. So as these European African honeybees are on the decline, these native bees might need a second look. And there are a couple of photos of them here, and they're about the size of a honeybee, but they call them sometimes blue orchard bees. Depending on how the sun strikes them, they may appear black, but if you get them in a bright sun, they're just this iridescent, beautiful blue. But they're about the size of a normal honeybee. One of those 2,000 species of native bees are these blue orchard bees, sometimes called mason bees, and we'll look at how they got that name. But they're solitary bees. They don't live in these colonies of tens of thousands like honeybees. Unlike honeybees, every female mason bee, blue orchard bee, same thing, every female is fertile and every female can reproduce. Now, if we think about honeybees living in these large colonies, and if you've gotten close to a beehive or been running your weed eater near a beehive, they have these defensive strategies. And, you think about, well, I thought, what survival of the fittest, how does that play in? If this honeybee stings me, she's going to die. So how did that behavior develop? And as we know, all the most, almost all the worker bees in a hive are siblings. You have a queen that lays the eggs, and these develop into the worker bees, the drones, the whatever's in there, all the classes of bees, castes of bees. And if she dies, her gene pool, if you will, is surviving in the females, the males, the queen, most importantly, the queen that she protects in that hive. When we look at the mason bees and other solitary native bees, they don't have these defensive strategies to protect the hive. They're busy getting food for their young, reproducing, gathering pollen, etc. So if you pick up one of these mason bees, chances are she will not sting you unless you hurt her. So they just haven't developed these defensive strategies. They are very efficient pollinators of most crops, almost all native species, but many of our agricultural crops are well pollinated by mason bees. In fact, they are much more efficient than honeybees. It's estimated that 250 mason bees um, will pollinate as many apples as two beehives of 15 to 20,000 bees in each hive. And so you say, well, why is this the case? How can these bees do this? Well, they're not messing with making honey. They're just going around gathering pollen. That's all they're doing. And they're not bringing honey back. They're not aerating the hive. They're not tending a queen. All of those jobs that honeybees are doing. They're also capable of pollinating a number of plants that honeybees cannot pollinate as efficiently. Honeybees may be able to do so. Like honeybees, these mason bees can travel in a radius of about a half mile. So you're looking at a circle, if you will, that has a half-mile radius. I mean, that's a pretty large area that they can gather from. But most things about them are very similar to honeybees. Their life cycle, just like a honeybee, they have this complete metamorphosis where the queen lays an egg in the honeybee. In the mason bees, it's any female. And that turns into a little grub-like larva. And then that larva pupates and emerges as an adult. Um, but all the female bees in mason bees lay their eggs in a tunnel in wood. Now, when I first read this, I thought we're talking about carpenter bees, wood bees. Now, these bees don't have a mouth part that's adapted for chewing into the wood. They will use a tunnel that a wood bee dug through the wood, or a woodpecker made in the wood, or some other insect dug into the wood. They'll use that tunnel, but their mouth parts are not adapted for chewing through wood. Um, so they lay these eggs in there, and these eggs develop over the year in these holes in the wood and these tunnels in the wood. And they go through their life cycle from the hatching egg to the larva to the pupa. And then in the spring, they emerge as adults and they continue the life cycle. So I have a view of a cut open channel, and this is kind of what it looks like. The female bee at the end of the tunnel, all the way back at the very end, she will lay an egg and put pollen in it and then seal it up with mud. And this is a clue by how they get the name mason bee. It's because they work the mud much like a mason would work mortar in blocks. So she puts an egg in there and pollen and sections it off, puts another egg, pollen, and so forth. What's interesting is that the first eggs she puts in there are going to be eggs that will produce females. So she'll get these female eggs laid, and the eggs closest to the end of the tunnel that's the exit to the tunnel, those are going to be males. And what a great strategy this is, that it does a couple of things to help their reproductive strategies. Unfertilized eggs are going to produce males. Fertilized eggs produce females. So by putting these eggs in here, again, it does a couple of things. If it's a really hard winter, I'm sorry, I told you backwards. The first eggs to go in are the female eggs. Female eggs go in first. And the ones toward the exit are the males. I don't know if I told you wrong or not, but the females are the first ones to go in. The males were the last ones to go in. When the weather starts, if it's an especially cold winter, which ones die? Are these males? Well, you say, well, that's bad. You got to have males and females. Well, maybe. The other thing is when the weather warms up, let's say they all live, the first ones to go out are the males. The males are flying around, and you know what's on their mind while they're flying around? They're looking for the girls. So it may be that females from another group, from another nest, if you will, have hatched out earlier. So that reduces the probability of a male from this hive mating with one of his siblings because the females will be out from another hive, perhaps. Um, if a predator comes along and is digging in here to eat these grubs, like a woodpecker, which ones are they going to get? Well, the male ones. Again, I don't like the idea of all these males dying, but that is a reproductive strategy. If you have just a few males out there, they can mate with a number of females so the population will survive. But they also have another really neat reproductive strategy, and this just amazes me. That suppose one of these females hatches out, leaves the hive, flies around, and she encounters no males. There's no males in the population. Her eggs will be unfertilized. So what will she produce next year? All male offspring. If there's plenty of males out there when she emerges as a newly hatched out female, flies around, if she mates with a male, her eggs could potentially be fertilized and produce more female offspring, which can grow the population. So it just amazes me the reproductive strategies that this tiny insect has to ensure the success. So you say, how can I get these things around me? Well, they're probably already there, but you can create a nest box for them very easily. Um, that can be as simple as a block of untreated wood. Now, treated wood is treated against insects. But if you get an untreated block of wood, it could be a chunk of firewood, and you put dead end holes, holes that do not go all the way through, at 3/8 of an inch in diameter. And that 3/8 of an inch is common to honeybees and mason bees. And these should be mounted above the ground where predators are less likely to get to them, and that the sunlight warms them for at least part of the day. And it could be something as simple as just a chunk of firewood or a 2x4 with holes in it that are 3/8 of an inch. It could be something a little fancier like this. Again, 3/8 of an inch holes. Um, they should be placed near a pollen source. Well, here in Kentucky, we got a lot of pollen sources, and not far from a place that has damp soil or mud. Well, this recommendation came from an extension office in Utah. Yeah, damp soil or mud is probably easier to find in Kentucky than it is in the deserts of Utah. Um, these are some commercially available mason bee houses. But, if you look at this, you can buy a commercially made one if you want, but I'm thinking this is not too hard. They should not be painted or stained. The smell can drive away the bees. The darker wood helps it warm up more quickly. I usually sear mine with a propane torch and just blacken it a little, but you don't want to paint it or stain it. But you could do something as simple as a bundle of straws, and we've done these with groups of children. It is important that the straws be paper. A group used plastic straws, and the straws to use are the ones that are 3/8 of an inch. I think they might be called Slurpee straws or smoothie straws or something like that, but they're the large diameter ones. Um, And you could just stick them down in a large can, and it's best to tilt them a little forward. So if water gets in there, the water will drain out toward the front. But that is a very simple way of attracting mason bees to your garden. Um, Again, since they're not honey producers, these are never going to replace honeybees, but they can augment honeybees in the role of pollination. Uh, I don't know if you're familiar with the Biosphere 2, the experiment in Arizona, where they had a self-contained dome and put people in there, plants and so forth. No oxygen could get in, no water could get in, and everything was completely recycled in there. And visited there a couple of years ago and saw in there they had habitats for native bees in Biosphere 2. Um, but this is a little better picture of what they look like. The blue orchard bee. I'll quickly go through some other native bees that were here in North America before Europeans brought honeybees in, and just go through these very quickly. Squash bees, obviously, pollinate squash. These ones live in shallow nests in the soil, and they come out really early. And I don't know anything we can do to attract them. Um, Bumblebees break the rule a little bit. They are colonial. They live in groups and frequently in rodent holes in soil. And we know of about 50 species of bumblebees. And they're really good pollinators of tomatoes. They're big enough to sort of buzz that tomato. Now, please don't confuse these bumblebees with the carpenter bees. Take a look at this bumblebee very carefully and look at its profile, its wing shape, and its abdomen here. And then let's look at the carpenter bee that everybody confuses them with. So you can see this abdomen is shiny and the wings look very different than the bumblebee. These don't do a great deal of pollination. They're sometimes considered nectar thieves because instead of going through the top of the flower and getting pollen, they'll cut a hole in the bottom of the flower and suck nectar out of it. Leaf cutter bees, instead of using mud, they use leaves. And I get these every year that will build inside my frost-proof hydrant, my water tap. And I'll go out and I'll turn the water on and I'll get a bunch of leaf pieces and sometimes larval bees out if I haven't used it for a while. But very similar to mason bees, they just use pieces of leaves. They don't get enough leaf matter to cause significant plant damage. Of course, the sweat bees that we're all familiar with, um, they're not thought of as major pollinators, but in the West, they're excellent pollinators of these large fields of irrigated alfalfa. This is one of my favorites. They're minor bees, and they come out really early. And I love because they've got a yellow mohawk. And who would not like a bee with a yellow mohawk? But they are excellent pollinators of azaleas as well as apple trees. So just sort of a wrap up, be aware of these native bees that are out there. You may not be able to keep a beehive, have the time for it. I recommend these a lot to schools that want to have to do something with pollinators, because unlike honeybees, they don't have to have the maintenance, and then they're not aggressive at all.